everybody, and welcome to another episode of Right Here, Right Now, live Buffalo football talk presented by Forefathers Organics. I'm your host, Alex Brasky, here for the Batavia Daily and Livingston County News, where each week we'll discuss Buffalo's favorite football team, along with all the comings and goings from Orchard Park, or in this case, Indianapolis. Day 4 of the NFL Scouting Combine. Plenty to discuss from this week. We've already had one podcast this week. We talked with Greg Thompson of Cover One. And today we'll welcome in another guest, Joe Marino of the Locked On Bills podcast, also Locked On Scouting podcast, and much, much more from Joe in the media sphere. But before we get to our guest, Joe, and a little pre-discussion before Joe hops in, let us thank our sponsor, Forefathers Organics in Dansville.
Unlock the power of nature with Forefathers Organics, your premium CBD store. We offer the highest quality CBD and hemp products to liberate your mind, body, and soul, helping you live happy and free. Our mission is driven by excellence and transparency, using cutting-edge scientific methods to combat stress and target issues at their source. From potent ingestible CBD to soothing topicals, all our products are USDA certified organic. Discover all natural wellness from farm to table. Visit forefathersorganics.com for more information.
All right, once again here from the Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. The Underwear Olympics have begun. The prospects are at Lucas Oil Stadium as we speak, finishing up some workouts. It's the defensive linemen today. I got a good look at a few prospects that perhaps the Bills will have their eye on. Kenneth Grant did not participate, was discovered he had a hamstring strain during his medical checkup here at the Combine. He pushed to participate today, but was eventually held out. But we did get a chance to see some others. I know Kenneth Grant is really the big name that Bills fans are talking about. I'll talk about another player that really caught my eye that I think will be around for the Bills at number 30 in a few moments. But as I said before, so much to talk about here at the NFL Combine. We had a reporter dust up last night. Ian Rappaport of NFL Network and Jordan Schultz of Fox Sports getting into it at Starbucks reportedly, and NFL security having to get involved. And obviously it makes for good fodder on social media whenever you see something like that happen. I'm hoping that nobody got injured or anything like that. Hopefully the two can make amends and reach a common ground there. But it all centered around Schultz's report that Tom Brady, who is a minority owner with the Las Vegas Raiders, spoke with Matthew Stafford and was trying to recruit him to go to Las Vegas with the Raiders while at a ski resort, I believe, in Montana. And Schultz reporting that, Rappaport refuting that report later on, and using some not so nice quotation marks that I'm sure upset Jordan, and that's kind of what led to the dust up at Starbucks. Boy, would I have loved to be on a fly on the wall for that one. Ian Rappaport is a smaller guy like myself. We really like to fight dirty. We like to use our leverage, bite some ankles, maybe a few low blows here and there. So that one really would have been interesting to see. And then Adam Schefter coming out with a tweet this morning, kind of trolling the whole situation. That was really, really spot on and well done by Schefter, kind of playing third wheel in that situation with the NFL insiders across the league in two different outlets, I should say. But let's get back to business before Joe Marino hops on with us in just a few moments. Pre-recorded conversation, talked with Joe on Wednesday. So excited for you to hear his thoughts on the Combine, the draft, Bills offseason, this, that, and the other thing. But first, before we get there, really one player that caught my eye at the Scouting Combine today, Derek Harmon, a 4.9740. I think he's going to be around for the Bills at number 30. And some measurements on Derek Harmon: 6'4.5", 313 pounds, 34 3/8 inch arms, 10 3/8 inch hands. That courtesy of Air Raid Buffalo, the Bills guys on Twitter. They do a great job with their draft coverage, combine coverage as well. They deem him an early down plugger next to Ed Oliver, 17% pressure rate for passing down usage. And that 4.9740 really stood out to me today. Guy's a burner for a big guy, and that's really what you need at the defensive tackle position nowadays. You need those big bodies who can stuff the run, but they have to be able to move, chase down runners, and move sideline to sideline. And it seems like Harmon is very, very capable of that. And like I said, I think he's a player that you'll see there at number 30 for the Bills. So keep your eye on Derek Harmon. We'll talk about more prospects as the week goes along. But let us welcome in our guest, Joe Marino. Very grateful for him to spend some time talking Bills offseason, combine, and draft. And without further ado, we bring in Joe for a brief conversation. All right, joined now by Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills and the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, amongst many other opportunities that he's found himself over the years. Joe, I'm sure I left some stuff out. Feel free to plug what I left out, but most of all, thanks for having me.
Good to be with you.
Thank you for joining me, I should say.
It's good to be on with you, Alex, and just football guy. I'll just go with that, and happy to talk football with you, and obviously a lot of different hands in different jars, but just a football guy,
Of course, and we appreciate you taking the time. I know this is a busy time of year for you, being the draft guru that you are. But first, I want to touch on some hot topics that kind of stem from Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane's time at the podium earlier this week in Indianapolis. And I want to start with Keon Coleman. There's been a lot of conjecture ever since the postseason press conferences when there was a little bit of candid talk about how he recovered from injury, how he was able to respond to that situation, this, that, and the other thing. So I want to start with Keon Coleman and get your impressions on the comments made by Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. And were there any kind of things to read through the tea leaves there, or was that just coach speak trying to motivate a player heading into his second season?
I think it goes back to the year-end press conferences and the comments that were made there. And, certainly a clear message that they don't feel like Keon Coleman came back from that injury and was the same player. He wasn't. There's nothing to defend there. He didn't play the same way that he did pre and post injury. And I think what is probably lost in the conversation, and I thought Brandon Beane did a good job of kind of bringing everyone back to a reasonable place in that, there were some ups, and really throughout the first 9 games, he was on pace production-wise with all the rookie receivers that everyone's excited about. And then, of course, he has the wrist injury. It takes him multiple weeks to get back, which also kind of coincides with the onboarding of Amari Cooper. And, he wasn't the same. There's no question about it. And I think there's a lot that he can learn from this season in terms of being a very young player. He's 21 years old, and he hasn't even fully committed to football for that many years of his life, right? I mean, basketball background, very young. And I think it's somewhat to be expected that there's going to be ups and downs. And obviously this is an opportunity for him to go out and prove it this offseason, earn his opportunity, and we'll see where it goes. But obviously the Bills had high aspirations for Keon Coleman, and I thought for half the season he met them, half the season he didn't, and he'll have that opportunity to go make things right in year 2. And we've seen a lot of Bills players show a lot of growth from year 1 to year 2. And, whether that's Terrell Bernard or even a Dorian Williams. And I think Keon Coleman will look to solidify his role and be the player that he was drafted to be. Obviously, he's got to improve, and he has to become more consistent, and he's got to be more aware of what a season in the NFL is like, but he'll be in a lot better position to capitalize on the reasons the Bills drafted him next year.
Sure. And I was looking at my previous tweets as you were going through that. And I tweeted it out last night. 4 receptions, 125 yards in week 7 against the Titans, 5 receptions, 70 yards, and a touchdown in week 8 against Seattle. And then he gets hurt, or he comes out of the game late in that game against the Dolphins the following week. But I think there were some people, and myself included, talking about how he was emerging as one of the top rookie receivers in the league. And then, of course, he gets hurt and everything goes south. But kind of branching off from that in a similar vein with Dalton Kincaid, where do you see his progression? Obviously, a major dip this year after a successful rookie year. There was the talk that Eric Ciano's departure from the Bills may have coincided with those two players' inability to overcome injury, and in Kincaid's situation, his perceived inability to add some weight. So kind of a two-pronged question. Where do you see Kincaid's progression at this point? And do you think that the way that those two players recovered from injury, do you think it may have coincided with Ciano's departure? He finds himself, I believe, in Carolina now, if I'm not mistaken.
Jacksonville.
Jacksonville. Okay. I know it was down south.
I think with the Eric Ciano situation, I don't think it's any one thing. It's probably a number of different things, whether it is Kincaid and maybe his progression. A lot of guys returning from injuries, not just in season, but you think about Tre'Davious White and his road back, and Von Miller and his road back. It's been kind of bumpy there. And
of course,
I'm sure all of that layered together, and then you kind of had like compounding injuries at the same position. This was the wrist. Last year was the calf with the defensive lineman. You probably look at all this and feel like, all right, maybe it's time to reconsider what's going on here with our strength staff. And, I think in the NFL, things run their course. They do, right? It's eventually you've done all you can in a spot, and that's why there's a lot of turnover and guys bounce around. I think maybe Eric Ciano ran his course in Buffalo. As for Dalton Kincaid, man, I think he's a really, really talented football player. Yeah. And I thought the biggest thing, certainly there's play strength, right? We talked about play strength since he was at Utah. And talk about another guy that's still new to football, right? He didn't even start playing football until his freshman year in high school. And kind of has a winding path to get to being a first round pick. But like the dude had a historic rookie season, man, like top 10 all time in terms of yards and receptions. And like that happened. No, the jump didn't happen year 1 to year 2. And I think the overall transition offensively probably didn't help Dalton Kincaid, but more than anything, and I feel like this is so overlooked in this conversation, is that Josh Allen has to be better for Dalton Kincaid, right? And I think that it's very hard to extend any criticism to Josh Allen because he does make up for a lot on this roster. He's unbelievable. He's the savior. He's the quarterback everyone dreamed about. I get it. He's the NFL MVP. I think the world of Josh Allen. Right?
And don't dare do it in front of Bills Mafia. They will not have it.
Made a little bit of a career out of this, Alex. So, but the reality, I mean, both things can be true. He can be everything that I just said. But at the same time, the percentage of inaccurate throws to Dalton Kincaid were alarming, especially 10 yards or more down the field. It's no coincidence the guy hurts his PCL trying to chase down a ball that was inaccurate from Josh Allen when he was wide open down the field against Indianapolis. Like, they just didn't have the chemistry. They didn't. It's disappointing that that's the case, but there's things that Dalton's got to get better at. But I think more than anything, they've got to develop that chemistry and that rapport to give Dalton Kincaid a better opportunity to capitalize on the chances he does get in the passing game, because his route running data, exceptional. His yards after catch data, exceptional. Inaccurate throw rate, crazy high, among the worst of any target in the NFL. It's actually pretty embarrassing when you look at his neighbors and the quarterbacks that were throwing the football. So Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid, more than anything, they got to get their chemistry down, especially down the field.
Yeah, and I was extremely critical, I would say, of Kincaid after the season, just reflecting on what he did throughout the course of the year. But I think what you're saying with the uncatchable balls and balls off target, I think a microcosm of that is the final pass thrown his way of the season when he was unable to come up with that catch to extend that drive against the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think it's a more in-depth conversation than maybe some people are willing to give it credit for, and perhaps myself included in that conversation. But I bring up, don't criticize Josh Allen in front of Bills Mafia, just because I had a conversation with Greg Thompson, who I had on earlier today. We're recording this on Wednesday, and I posted on social media. By no means am I blaming the Bills offense more than the defense for their postseason failures, anything like that. I just feel like a lot of people are hesitant to place blame at Josh Allen's feet in any circumstance, whether it come to Kincaid, whether it come to failures in the playoffs. And I think that there is room for that, although you obviously have to take into account how far he's taken this franchise.
Alex, if I can give you some hard data here, because I have it, I think it's important. If we're going to bring this up, let's give the real numbers here. Among the 41 NFL tight ends to run at least 200 routes in 2024, only 69% of Kincaid's targets were catchable, the lowest of any tight end in the NFL. When targeted 10 or more yards down the field, Kincaid's catchable target rate went down to 37%. Come on, right? Like,
can't do it.
And is that all Josh Allen? Probably not, right? It's getting on the same page.
Yep.
They just got to get on the same page because Kincaid's talented. He's very, very talented. And like the route running, he's top 10 in route win rate, like top 3 in yards after catch. The guy can play. They got to get on the same page.
And perhaps he was a victim of the high expectations lofted his way early in the season. I think we often forget that young players, the progression isn't always linear. Sometimes it is a little bit turbulent, and obviously Kincaid experiencing some of that turbulence this season. The next topic I want to get to, I know that we're kind of approaching the end of our conversation. James Cook, not a free agent. We could talk all day about some of the free agents that the Bills need to consider bringing back. I don't think any are really worthy of a lengthy discussion, but James Cook demanding the $15 million, where do you see his value? Where would you be comfortable with the Bills re-signing him in terms of average annual value and term? Are you kind of turned off by the way that he's gone about things, or do you understand it being a running back in today's day and age? So kind of a convoluted question there.
Yeah, listen, I'm not going to be critical of somebody trying to maximize their earnings potential. Like, that's fine. I don't take any exception whatsoever with his efforts to do so. But I do look at the running back market and where guys get paid and what James Cook does and doesn't do on a football field. And I do take exception with the dollar amount that he's seeking. $15 million a year, that's as a percentage of cap, that's just too high. As a player that, I mean, he's a 45 to 50% of the snaps player because he doesn't pass block, and he's not necessarily the guy that they want in at end of half situations. Not the guy that they want to have in terms of some of the short yardage opportunities. So there's limitations there. And the guys that get $15 million a year, or what would equate to that percentage of cap at signing, they play 75% of the snaps, and they're trusted in those big situations. Yeah. And so where I think there's a disconnect, and I thought Brandon Beane pretty much came out and said it in his presser. He said, just because we're not on the same page now doesn't mean that we won't be in 2 weeks or months. He's saying right now we're not on the same page. And we know, because James Cook's let us know, he's seeking $15 million a year. Brandon Beane said we're not on the same page, all right? So there's a discrepancy here, and I think there should be a discrepancy because I don't think that's a market rate that makes sense for James Cook. And so here's where I'm at with it. Play out the season. Go show that you can be a 75% of the snaps back, right, that you can be trusted in pass protection. Alex, something that nobody's talking about is that James Cook was on the field for that last drive against the Kansas City Chiefs. He was on the field for 3 of the 6 plays. Okay. He was, and twice he ran out in routes and wasn't targeted. And once he was in pass protection and he could not block Leo Chenal. And it was a play where Curtis Samuel was running away from coverage and Josh Allen could not find the space in the pocket to get the throw off because Leo Chenal is closing down. The ball gets batted down at the line of scrimmage because James Cook can't pass protect. That's what the problem is. He can't be in those high leverage situations because he's not trusted to pass pro. He's 5'11", 195 pounds. There's a big difference in being able to run and extend contact into another human being to be physical as a runner. It's a whole nother story to be able to be static and absorb contact from a linebacker that's blitzing. Cook, look, can he get stronger? Sure, but he's got a body composition issue that's going to make it challenging to be consistently stout in pass protection, not to mention whatever the mental side of scanning and protecting is going to be. And so is that going to be a limitation that exists all the time or not? I think that's where you find your clarity in getting to the right market value that makes sense for James Cook and the Bills. Right now, I just feel like go play out the season. Go play out the season and see where you land and if it's a different conversation at this time next year.
Yeah, and I also think that pass blocking ability for a running back, that's just an innate ability that sometimes you just don't have it in you to become an elite pass blocker the way that we've seen Ty Johnson sort of develop into and others that have come through Buffalo in the past as well. And I can understand what James Cook is doing. And you say, sure, Brandon Beane, they're not on the same page right now. And perhaps that's by design by James Cook as part of the negotiation process. Ask for a number too high and maybe you settle somewhere in the middle. So I'm sure a lot of Bills fans are hoping that the Bills and James Cook are able to do that. But let's move to some combine and draft talk. Defensive line was the focus today at the combine. A lot of prospects at the podium. Kenneth Grant, obviously the player that everybody is talking about amongst Bills Mafia. That seems to be the consensus favorite for the Bills at number 30. Your impressions of him? I know that you do a lot of work with the draft, so excited to hear your impressions of him and what type of fit he would be for the Bills. It seems like he'd be a fit for any team, but specifically for the Bills in this situation.
Yeah, if he makes it to pick 30, I think it'd be tough to convince me he wouldn't be the best player on the board. And obviously then there's that beautiful thing of best player on the board at a position of need. Correct. I think the Bills, in their efforts to get younger and cheaper with their defensive or with their team, right? With their team, they made one exception. It was Daquan Jones. And I think we're looking back on that, wondering if that was the right choice. And so whether it's upgrading Daquan Jones or complementing Daquan Jones or succeeding Daquan Jones, I think you need to find a player that can do that. And boy, with Kenneth Grant be an answer, big-bodied guy that's athletic. And I think he's one of those nose tackles. Like there's a lot of different types of nose tackles. A lot of them are just big space-eating guys. What I like about Kenneth Grant is he's big, but he's also very, very athletic, can rush and be a math changer, right? With a Bills team that wants to play a lot of light boxes, boy, this would be an asset to your interior defensive line where he could probably play gap and a half a lot of times, but also give you some pocket pushing ability. I don't know if he gets to 30, Alex, but if he does, you'd be hard pressed to convince me that he wouldn't be the best player on the board.
Yeah, he is a mountain of a man. Seeing him stand atop that podium and talking about his sideline to sideline ability, I can only imagine what he could bring to the Bills alongside Ed Oliver. And I think that's exactly what Ed Oliver needs, a space eater, somebody who's dynamic that can take some of that focus away. Are you good for 5 more minutes, Joe? I know I told you that. Oh, all right.
Yeah,
all right,
we're good.
How about Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, another player that's up there in terms of some of the top prospects? I'm not sure you'd see him fall to the Bills at 30. Maybe you'd have to see a trade-up scenario. I know that we've seen Brandon Beane do that before. 17 sacks in his senior season. I believe that was in high school. I'm not really up to date with the draft, so I'm kind of doing research as we go here. Give me your impressions of Walter Nolan. What type of fit is he for the Bills? Is there any chance that we see him get to a position where we might see him in Buffalo?
Yeah, I like Walter Nolan a ton. Very, very dynamic penetration style player. He would definitely be more of a 3-tech that would kind of be in the role that Ed Oliver is in. And so I think on rush downs, I think they'd be a good pair. It'd be tough to have them on the field simultaneously. I think that's what might complicate it. But I mean, if Walter Nolan's at 30, then that's just the type of talent where you just figure it out. I think there's some red flags with Walter Nolan that we gotta learn about in terms of his transition from I think he was at Texas A&M, if I'm not mistaken, previously. Some things that I've heard there that need to be investigated. But if the characters checks out okay, I mean, he's a dynamic defensive lineman that I think has a lot of athleticism and a lot of traits that translate to playmaking, right? Big splash plays that I think would make him a great option for any team.
And Grant has already met with the Bills. Not sure if that was informal or formal. Didn't quite get to the bottom of that, but he's already been having conversations with the Bills. So the pipe dream is well alive. And how about Derek Harmon? He's probably more of a fit in terms of Kenneth Grant and what the Bills need alongside Ed Oliver, a big, strong, maybe nose tackle type player. Am I on point there?
Yeah, Derek Harmon out of Oregon. I think he's a realistic target. I wouldn't be surprised if Harmon was there at 30. I think he probably goes in that 25 to 45 range. It would definitely be a good fit as an A-gap defender. Not a big sloppy dude, but a big player, right? Like he's got a lot of size that I think works for being a nose tackle, especially in an up the field penetration style front, right? There's all different types of fronts and different types of nose tackles. I think he does kind of fit the style for the Bills, like where even you think about Daquan Jones and he's not a big space eater, right? Like I think that Harmon kind of profiles traditionally what we've seen the Bills go after, whether it's Daquan Jones or even Harrison Phillips, or going back to Carolina, Starlo Talele, you think about the nose tackles that they've actually invested in, right? I think he kind of profiles along those lines. A lot of length there. Guy that can, lock, peak, shed, defend the run, has some pass rush upside. I think it's a very realistic target, not only for the need, the type of player, and then where I expect him to go in terms of range of the draft. I think Harmon's very much on the menu for Buffalo.
So might need to get a little bit lucky with Grant. Harmon probably on the menu, as you said, whereas Nolan probably a little bit of a pipe dream.
Yeah, I think there's just the complicating factors are redundancy to what you have in Ed Oliver. And then, I'm not breaking any news here, but I think there's some red flags that need to be investigated with Walter Nolan. And I don't think the teams are the Bills are the type of team that wants to be too ambitious with maybe some of those red flags. They care about how guys are wired in their makeup, and maybe there's some concerns there with Walter Nolan.
Last question about the combine draft. Did I leave anybody out at defensive tackle that you'd like to mention? Maybe even in the later rounds that they could pick up. I know how Brandon Beane has been so successful in those third, fourth, those middle rounds. And then if you could briefly touch on maybe a cornerback, defensive back or two that you have your eye on.
Well, I think the other defensive tackle is Alfred Collins out of Texas. And, the Bills have 2 second-round picks right now. I could see him being a target for either one. And, I like to think about the draft in combinations where, okay, well, maybe you love to get this type of player here, but you can get that player, but a similar player a little bit later, and you think about pairs. And I think Alfred Collins is very much, hey, yeah, you don't get Kenneth Grant or, Derek Harmon doesn't work out because either he was drafted or there's another player that you like more. Your fallback option's Alfred Collins, a big old dude, man, that I think can really plug the run and push the pocket. So that's my fallback nose tackle, if you will. You mentioned some corners. I got to do a lot more work on corners, to be honest with you. I've done some of the top guys. I've done Shavon Revel from ECU, and I like him a ton, but, coming off of an ACL, I don't think the Bills are going to be getting Will Johnson or Travis Hunter. Yeah. So I've done them. So I got a little bit more work to do on corners before we get there. But I think the Bills, when I think about the investment they should make at corner, I think they should let Rasul Douglas walk. And I think you have an open competition between a mid-round pick, Kyer Elam, Jamarcus Ingram, and then I think like a low-cost vet, one of those just kind of looking for a one-year deal, maybe a Shaq Griffin type player, and sort it out, because I think you're going to have a high-paid corner in Benford. You got a high-paid slot in Taron Johnson. When you're looking for economic opportunities on your roster, CB2 might be a good one for the Bills to consider.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on cornerback. We're going to have Carl Jones on. We're going to really dive in with him on the defensive backs, all his experience playing at the collegiate level. So excited to talk to Carl. And just last thing, don't have to go too in-depth, just your thoughts on the NFLPA voting with Sean McDermott. It's becoming a little bit tiresome, the continuous slander of the Bills head coach, finding different ways to do it.
Who was the highest rated coach, Alex? Was it Mike McDaniel?
Is that really who it was?
Yeah, the guy that lets his veterans pick their practice schedule and is known for running a soft training camp. I'm really surprised that he's the A+ coach. And,
shocked.
A team really down there in South Florida, with no state income tax.
Really translated to success.
Yeah, they're really a tough football team that really shows up late in the season. Yeah, I care a lot about wins and losses, Alex, and I feel like the Bills do pretty well there.
I'm with you, Joe, and thank you for spending a few extra minutes with us and always joining us whenever I reach out. It's much obliged, and especially this time of year, because when it comes to draft stuff, I am kind of up a creek. So appreciate you, and if you want to plug anything, sure. If not, we'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Locked On Bills, Herd Mentality Substack. Appreciate you having me on, brother.
Thanks a lot. All right. Many thanks to Joe for joining us. He does a great job. Locked On Bills, the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. Plenty to go around with Joe. He also has his own Substack that he provides written analysis as well. So make sure you follow Joe on Twitter if you're not already at the Joe Marino and follow all of his work. It's very valuable for somebody like me who doesn't really follow the draft that closely throughout the season. I really catch up at this time of year. Joe is someone who is locked on, no pun intended, the draft throughout the season. So his analysis is very valuable to me, very valuable to the listener as well, and very appreciative of him taking some time yesterday to join me for a pre-recorded conversation. And that's going to do it for today's show. Maybe a little bit quicker than the past few shows, but wanted to give you guys some analysis here from the Scouting Combine. We'll join you again on Friday. We have Carl Jones of News 4 in Buffalo, pre-recorded conversation from Wednesday. We'll splice that into the show on Friday. So be sure to join us tomorrow here from Indianapolis. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.